was good. Don't let this title scare you. I mean, I'm using the U.S. here as an example, but I hope to make a general point of it. As I said in my last talk, there's a theme that runs through all three of my talks today, and that theme is there are narratives about various, popular narratives that are widely accepted about various topics. Each of these narratives, I think, is wrong. And I'm going to show you a narrative here and then try to draw a larger lesson from it. I have some what I hope you'll find to be enjoyable pictures to show, more enjoyable than the ones I had of toilets and toilet paper and underwear. So the title of this one is America's Middle Class Stagnating. But here's the narrative that is out there now. The narrative is from the beginning of U.S. as an independent nation until 1975, or sometime in the 1970s, living standards for ordinary Americans improved. In the mid-1970s, that improvement abruptly stopped. And from the mid-1970s until now, ordinary Americans live the same today as we did 30, 35 years ago. There's been no further improvement in that. Let me say before I begin that much of the data, I'm going to show you some data at first before I get to the pictures, that I'll show you, I take up to the beginning of the financial crisis. I didn't want the data from the financial crisis that started in 2008 to corrupt the larger picture, because the narrative about America's middle class stagnating, it has nothing to do with what happened during the financial crisis. It's a story about secular decline, about ordinary Americans just, for some reason, failing to share as they once did in the fruits of economic growth. Here are just a few samples of this narrative from fairly famous people. This is from Robert Reich, who now teaches at University of California, Berkeley. He was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Labor, writing in the Financial Times, pretty prestigious publication, back in January of 2008, quoting him, "Almost all of the benefits of economic growth since the 1970s have gone to a small number of people at the very top." So there has been growth, it just goes all to the people at the very top, the top 1%. Ordinary people, no, they are not getting better at all. This is Ned Phelps, a man generally, unlike Reich, of the political right. Reich is a man of the political left. Ned Phelps is a 2006 winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics. In a generally very, very good book called Mass Flourishing that came out 2 years ago, Phelps writes, "Modern Western economies have been nearly stagnant. America since the mid-1970s and much of Western Europe since the late 1990s. You can find data. So one lesson of this talk, the general lesson, is that you can find, if you want to tell a story, you want to tell a narrative, you are a pretty dumb person if you cannot find data to support your narrative. I think it's the late Nobel laureate economist Ronald Coase who said this, but I could be wrong. Someone said that if you torture the data long enough, they will confess. It's easy to find data to tell a story. But statistics, while I sincerely believe them to be very useful, they have their place. They are essential. You have to be really careful when you encounter statistics, when you interpret them, and especially when you hear other people interpreting statistics. It's very easy to lie with statistics. So here it's very easy to tell a false story using true statistics. Here's a true statistic. This is a picture of median household income in America from 1976 until 2006. So from the time the stagnation allegedly began, the mid-70s, until just right before the financial crisis. And if you look, that line looks pretty darn flat. Over the course of 30 years, median household income, the amount of inflation-adjusted income earned by the typical household, has barely budged. If in fact it has gone up only 18%, then it's fair to call that stagnation. A little bit of growth, but not much. So I'm going to show you some of the data that supports this myth. I'll give you some data that contradict it, and then I'll show you some fun pictures. This is another picture that I just realized has a backstory behind it that I'll share with you quickly. This is a picture of real average hourly earnings of production and non-supervisory employees from January of 1972 to October of 2014. That's a fancy way of saying inflation-adjusted wages of ordinary factory workers, non-supervisory. So we're not talking about the Bill Gateses of the world, we're not talking about hedge fund managers or investment bankers or CEOs. We're talking about ordinary people, ordinary workers in the United States. As you take that wage and you adjust it for inflation over the years, so that's what we mean by real, and that looks pretty darn flat. From the mid-70s through basically now, it's not grown at all. The backstory behind this is I went to update this. This is a picture that I took from the website of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the main gatherer of these kinds of statistics in the U.S. And I know how to use that website pretty well, and I went recently to update it to October of 2015, and this data set has been taken down. It's been gathered for years, and it's been taken down. I can't get a consistent set, but 2014 is close enough to now, and you can trust me, what's happened between 2014 and 2015 to this figure hasn't changed that much. And so it looks like the average worker is just, as we say, treading water, just going nowhere. If you want to tell a story that ordinary Americans, all but the top Americans, are not sharing in the fruits of economic growth, that's a piece of data you can use. And it is a piece of data that a lot of people turn to. New York Times columnists who have Nobel Prizes in economics often point to this data. A man named Paul Krugman constantly points to this very piece of data and says, look, ordinary Americans are not benefiting because the average wage adjusted for inflation hasn't changed. I'm going to come back to these numbers later, so let me take a little bit of time and drive them home to you. If we don't adjust for inflation, if we take the numbers as they were in nominal terms, what they were in the actual years, without adjusting for inflation, in 1975, so mid-1970s, this average non-supervisory worker in America earned in 1975 $4.73 an hour, per hour. If you adjust that for inflation to today, that $4.73 is the equivalent of $20.98. So if you adjust it for inflation using something called the Consumer Price Index, $4.73 in 1975 is the equivalent of $20.98 today. Today, the average, that wage in October 2015, in 2015 dollars, that worker, that ordinary production worker, non-supervisory, hard hat, blue collar worker, earns $21.18 an hour. Well, you can see that $21.18 an hour, it's only 20 cents higher than what that worker earned, inflation adjusted, in 1975. If that's true, then indeed the typical American worker has not gained at all over the past 35 years, past 40 years. That would be genuine stagnation. And there are problems with these data. Some are how to adjust for inflation. This is one problem. If you're an economist, you know that adjusting for inflation is not a precise science. It is at least as much art as it is science. So when you hear statistics that are adjusted for inflation, understand that you can adjust those same monetary values differently using a different means of adjusting for inflation and come up with a different number. And sometimes the differences are significant. Also, the way people are paid changes over time. The data I showed you a moment ago, that last graph, that is hourly wages, the number of dollars. Not the, I'm here a figurative employer paying out dollars to a worker. More and more in the United States, payment comes in the form of what we call fringe benefits. These are payments to workers, but they're not included in the worker's hourly wage. These are employer contributions to a worker's health insurance payments, employer contributions to a worker's pension plan, an employer's contribution to a worker's, some employers set up plans to help workers' children go to college. These are non-wage forms of compensation. In 1975, about 10% of American wages came in the form of fringe benefits. Today, closer to 20% come in the form of fringe benefits. And so by not including those fringe benefits in workers' wages, we get an underestimate of how much American workers are being paid today. Also, when we look at households, that first line I showed you, that red line, a household changes over time in the number of people who live in the household. And it has changed over time since the mid-70s. If the number of people who live in a household change, then the amount of income paid to that household means different things. A simple example, if the number of people living in your household doubles overnight, but the amount of income earned by your household stays the same, well, clearly people in your household are on average worse off, because you're now taking the same amount of income and you're spreading it over twice the number of people. We'll see more, and I'll mention something about statistical illusion in just a second. I'm sorry that's blurry, but this is just something I pulled off of the website of the Minnesota Federal Reserve Bank. That's looking at that household income figure and adjusting it for inflation using different inflation adjusters. And using different inflation adjusters, we can find estimates that the change in household income over the course of those 30 years, from 76 to 2006, was anything from just 7% to 43%. These are all legitimate ways to adjust for inflation, but you get very different outcomes using different inflation adjusters. So if you hear a newscaster, if you hear a public speaker, you read in a newspaper some claim about what has happened to what has happened to real prices or real wages over time adjusted for inflation, understand that there are many different ways to adjust for inflation, no one of which is correct or incorrect. That's my celery bag. I usually work that in here, but I've already talked to you about the celery bag. I already mentioned the fringe benefits. So in 1976, the number of people who lived in the typical American household was 2.86. You take all the people living in households, and you divide that by the number of households, you go to 2.86. In 2006, it was 2.56. That doesn't sound like much, but it's an 11% difference. 11% fewer people lived in a typical American household in 2006 than did in 1976. So when you take that same amount of income and you spread it over fewer people, each person in the household has a larger slice of the pie. Making just that one lone adjustment, if we talk about, this is an awkward term, but per household person income, so the per income for each household person, then if income per household rises by 18% over the course of those 30 years, and looking at the income per person in the household, because you have fewer people in the household, then that's a 32% increase in that income. It's still not great, but it's a lot higher than 18%. So these statistics can get very tricky. That's just a picture of a baby I pulled off the web. When I did this presentation, my son was too old for me to take a picture of him. He was 17. And he's taller than me now. You see why this is relevant. So one explanation, and it may be true, for why the average wage of an ordinary American worker has stagnated is, well, just because they haven't gotten any raises. Or, here's another explanation that's very different. The statistic is true, but here's another possible explanation. As more people enter the workforce at the lower levels, at the lower wage earning levels, that addition of lower wage workers pulls down the average. Here's what I mean by that, and you'll see the relevance of the baby. Suppose, actually I know some families that do this. Well, I know one family that does it. Suppose that on January 1st of every, you have a young family, and on January 1st of every year, you measure the average height of your children. So let's say that on January 1st, 2015, so you had 2 kids. You had a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And you measure their average height. You know? Measure the height, add them up, and divide by 3. And you come up with, I don't know what it translates into in metric, because I'm still an American. Say it comes up to an average of 3 feet. I have no idea if that's relevant, if that's accurate or not. You get an average height of your children. Let's say on December 31st of this year, you have a 4th child, this lovely bundle of joy, another infant. Right? And on January 1st, 2016, you measure the average height of your children. So now you have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn, beautiful little baby infant. What do you think happens to the average height of your children? It probably falls. The reason it falls is because the infant is so tiny. The tiny infant pulls down the average. Now, when you measure the average height of your children, and you discover that it falls, you don't call the doctor and say, something's wrong, my children are shrinking. You understand that your children, in fact, they're all getting taller. Even the baby's taller than he or she was a year ago. Right? A year ago, he or she was, everybody's taller. You get the statistical illusion because you've changed the population over which the average is taken. This is very relevant for workers because especially since the mid-1970s, there have been 2 trends in the United States that have an effect on the average wage of low-skilled workers. We've had a dramatic increase in the number of low-wage immigrants coming to America. Many legally, others without documentation, but either way, they're part of the workforce. And I'm not arguing that they pull wages down. What I'm arguing is that because they're low-skilled immigrants, the wages that they earn are very low. Likewise with women. There's been an increase in the number of women entering the workforce. Women who are not entering with great skills, they've been housewives all their lives, and now they're entering the workforce. Their wages tend to be low as well. That's increased also since the mid-1970s. So these workers, while they're earning more than they were earning before, the women are earning something because they're working now in the labor market. The immigrants coming mostly from Latin America, where they were earning very, very low wages, now they're earning, although low wages by American standards, very high wages by the standards of their home countries. Those low wages pull down the statistical average. I can't prove this, but I know it's a major factor. I believe it is the major factor pulling down the average wage of the average measured statistical wage of the typical worker. And the bulk of what I'm going to show you in the rest of my presentation gives you some insight as to why I believe that that is the case. So I mentioned earlier that there's a problem with inflation adjustment. Again, it's as much an art as it is a science. What if we can somehow get rid of the need to adjust for inflation? Can we find a measure of earning power that tells us something meaningful, and we don't, and allows us to compare earning power in the past to earning power in the future or today, without having the problem of inflation adjustment? What I'm about to show you is an idea that I get from the economist Mike Cox, who's an economist at Southern Methodist University in Texas. He used to be the chief economist at the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. Now that I've publicly apologized to him, I can shamelessly steal his method, although the details are my own. To an American audience, this would mean a little bit more than it does to you, although really not to a modern American audience. This is the picture of a fall-winter 1975 Sears catalog. Sears was, especially then, the great retailer to middle America. Sears sold to the very workers whose wages I depicted a moment ago. Sears didn't sell to rich people, didn't sell to very poor people, sold to middle-income Americans. I chose this year because it's the mid-1970s, and also this is the year, fall, it's exactly the time, fall-winter, when I entered my senior year of high school. I turned 17 when this catalog came out. I actually remember this catalog because everyone in America got 3 Sears catalogs every year: the fall, winter, the spring, summer, and they got the Christmas wish book, which was always my favorite. And these were big catalogs. This one is 1,459 pages. And the first half of the catalog is full of clothing. The last half of the catalog is full of all sorts of things. You'll see some of them. Sears' logo back then, its advertising jingle was "Sears has everything," and that was pretty much true. It had everything. It's the closest thing people of my generation had to Amazon.com. But it's very different. Now, I didn't save this Sears catalog from 1975. A few years ago, I went onto eBay and I bought it. I bid on it. I found a Sears catalog from 1975. It was selling for 99 cents. I bid. Shockingly, no one else was bidding on it. So I won the bid. And then I agreed, then I had it shipped to me overnight. I paid $20 to have it shipped to me. Now, I wasn't in desperate need of the Sears catalog, but I wanted to, because I'm using it for this purpose. I wanted to be able to truthfully say I had it shipped to me overnight. And I can truthfully say I had it shipped to me overnight. Why is this relevant? Because in 1975, no one in America, except Gerald Ford, who was in the White House, and maybe Howard Hughes, who was the richest man in America then, was having anything shipped to or from him or her overnight. It wasn't available at any price. And yet, just a few years ago, for the hourly wage of an ordinary American worker, if I wanted to, and I did, I can have something shipped to me overnight. This was shipped to me from Seattle, Washington, literally across the country, to my home in Virginia, overnight. And you'll see various pictures in this catalog. I took these pictures with my cell phone. The reason that's relevant, no one was taking pictures with telephones in 1975. If you tried to take a picture with a telephone in 1975, you would have been institutionalized. So I took pictures of various pages of this book, and with the prices of the various products. And I asked, how many hours did the typical American worker in 1975 have to toil in order to earn enough income to buy each of these various products? So remember, the typical American worker in 1975 dollars earned $4.73 per hour. Then I compared, you'll see, those work times, the number of hours a typical American worker had to work in 1975, to the number of hours a typical American worker today must work to purchase a similar product. Remember, today, the typical American worker earns $21.18 per hour in 2015 dollars. So let's look to see what I've done. These are in no particular order. This is a 10-cup drip coffee maker. It makes American coffee, the real kind. Speaking of which. It's very basic. It just has an on-off switch. There's no timer, there's no alarm, it doesn't sing to you. Right? Just very basic. It doesn't automatically turn off if you forget to turn it off. In 1975 dollars, it cost $36.49 to buy that. So here's what I'm doing. If you were an ordinary worker in 1975 making $4.73 an hour, how many hours do you have to work to earn enough income to buy that coffee maker? Well, 7.7 hours, nearly a whole day. You have to work nearly a whole day to get enough income to buy that coffee maker. This is off of Sears.com. I couldn't even find a good 10-cup drip. This is 12-cup, so it makes more. Right? It's a simple one. It has an on-off switch, although it does turn off automatically if you don't turn it off within 2 hours. It costs $16.99 today, which means that the typical American worker today, oh, I forgot to update, it should be $21.18, has to work 48 minutes to buy it. So from almost a whole day to less than an hour to earn enough income to buy that coffee maker. What about a razor? So you wake up, you drink your coffee, you go to the bathroom, you're going to shave and shower. You use an electric shaver. This razor in 1975 cost nearly $30, which means that the typical worker had to work just over 6 hours to earn enough income to buy it. There's a similar razor today, $40, less than 2 hours worth of work to buy. So we can get our coffee, we can shave, less work time cost. I have very few pictures of clothing from the catalog for two reasons. Number one, it's offensive to a modern audience to show styles from the 1970s. I mean, they were really ugly. Right? They really were ugly. There were colors that you never see in nature. Actually, you don't see anywhere except in the 1970s. They were hideously long, hideous big bell bottoms. Men were wearing high-heeled shoes. Terrible styles. Right? That's one reason. The second reason, more serious reason, is you'll have to trust me on this, but you can verify it. It's very difficult to find in that catalog any clothing not made from petroleum. Almost all the clothing was made from petroleum. It's made out of polyester, which is made from petroleum. It was very difficult to find clothing made from all natural materials, like all cotton or all linen or all wool. I found a few, not many. Here's a pair of all cotton jeans, as opposed to 65% polyester, 35% cotton. Or believe me, 100% polyester jeans. Imagine how comfortable they were. Those one pair of all cotton all cotton jeans cost almost $7, 1.5 hours of work. This is off Sears.com, 42 minutes for all cotton jeans today. So we can dress in jeans at a lower work time cost. This is as risque as this presentation gets. This is all cotton men's underwear. So the cost of those was about 25 minutes of work for the typical American worker. It's a little faded out. Today, you can get all cotton men's underwear for 4 minutes of work. You have to trust me, the same is true for women's underwear. I just couldn't get any decent pictures of women's underwear that wouldn't risk things I don't want to risk, so I use men's underwear, but the same procedure. It's about 4 minutes for women's underwear too. So the amount of time we have to work to put our underwear, to get underwear. I just realized actually there's a lot of underwear being shown in this presentation. I don't have a fetish, but you can. Luggage. Then, as today, there are different qualities of luggage. Judging by the price, I used the middle quality of luggage that Sears sold. It was called the Wayfarer. One thing's interesting, and that is, luggage in 1975 was true to its name. You had to lug it. Right? You lugged it. There was no suitcase with a rope with wheels on it. All of them just had handles. Today we have rollage. We don't have luggage, we have rollage. We just call it luggage. Anyway, I took the price of that suitcase on the left. It took 7 hours of work to buy that suitcase without wheels. If you wanted, however, Sears did sell wheels separately. This device. Check that out. And it's got a knob on top. A knob. But you can get it for $20.99. And so if you wanted a suitcase that you could roll, you had to buy the wheels separately. So you got the suitcase and the wheels for a total of nearly a day and a half's worth of work, 11.4 hours of work to buy a piece of suitcase with luggage. That's a piece of luggage today available at Sears.com. It's the same size, space-wise, as the one I showed you earlier. The wheels are attached. It's got a handle and not a knob on top, and you can get it for only 2.1 hours of work. So you can travel at a lower, at least pack our stuff, for a lower amount of work time. An automobile battery, 9 hours. Today, 4 hours. We can start our cars for less work time than in the past. Automobile tire, I tried to get equivalent warranty length of tire and sizes of tire. So more than a day's worth of work in 1975, less than a half a day's worth of work today to buy an automobile tire. A lawn mower, a riding lawn mower, 82 hours to get that lawn mower. It cut a swath 26 inches wide, which is about that big. You can't buy them that small now. The smallest you can buy them is 42 inches. 55 hours. So a much worse product, much higher cost, better product, lower cost in work time. A boring metal file cabinet. The 4-drawer there, 44 hours of work in 1975, 10 hours of work today. Music. What do we do with music? So this is a 45. Do you guys remember, you know what 45s are? I showed this to my 18-year-old son. He thought, yeah, it's an old CD. It's not a CD. There was this primitive way of replaying music in my day. The music was in grooves, in vinyl, and then you'd scrape the vinyl across a needle, and then sound would come out. It actually sounds better than you thought, and you think it would. This is a 45. This is how you bought hit songs back in my day. This is actually from the 60s. This is the best picture I could get. This is the Beatles. Plus, I love the Beatles, so I want to celebrate the Beatles. But 45s was still the main single music source in 1975. In 1975, a 45 record cost 99 cents to buy. Or, you got two songs. You had the B-side song. No one bought it for the B-side song, but it had two sides. We put two songs on it. So 6.3 minutes of work for each song. But here's one of the interesting things about music. What do we do today for music? We don't have 45s. Oh. This is the best I could do. The iTunes symbol. $1.29 a song. Only 3.7 minutes. And it's digital. I know there are audiophiles who swear that vinyl is better than digital. That may be true for very, very high-end audio. Middle-class Americans then, neither then nor now, were listening to very, very high-end audio. And for, on ordinary equipment, digital is certainly better. These 45s, when you played them, they would get stuck like that. Or sometimes skip ahead. They would skip. The grooves got dirty and it'd be very scratchy when you listened to it. Digital is not like that. And when you wanted to buy one, this happened to me a lot because, I was a teenage boy in 1975, and so I was really into the music. So one thing I like about the 70s, by the way, I don't really have much fondness for the 70s. I do think it was a good music decade. Bad Company, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Elton John. So if I wanted to listen to, say, Elton John's Philadelphia, I remember this actually. I think it was Philadelphia Freedom. I really liked that song. I heard it on the radio. I want it. So I'd go to the store to buy it. This happened a lot. Oh, you're out of Philadelphia Freedom. Yeah, we just sold out. Come back on Tuesday. We'll have some more. Huh? So I have to go, 3 or 4 days without listening to the song I'm going to listen to. When I download music from iTunes, I am never told by the iTunes store, come back on Tuesday, we're out. Right? I get it right away, no matter where I am. I don't have to leave where I am. You can tell me a song right now. Say, oh, I remember that song. Hang on a second. It's downloading. and I could put my earplugs in and listen to it immediately in crisp, wonderful digital sound, all at a lower cost of work time than was true in 1975. Clock radio. You'll see why I put this in just a moment. You barely see these anymore. This had a clock radio and AM and FM radio. That's it. That's all it had. Didn't have CD player, didn't have a UBS port, just that was it. And you had to adjust it by hand. It's hard to find these things now. This is off Amazon.com. 34 minutes to get one as opposed to a day and a half's worth of work. But finally, we all have our slabs today. I notice most of you have your slabs. Some of you actually are looking at your slabs right now. You think I don't know, right? We all have our slabs. And I haven't used the clock radio in several years. This is my clock radio. The marginal cost, the additional cost that I have to pay for a clock radio is zero. And it's a lot better. I get to choose whatever sound I want to wake up to. I have my, he was then 17, my 17-year-old son's annoying voice in here. I got him at an annoying time, I recorded him, so when I want to wake up, I hear him. And it wakes me up right away. I can choose the sound. It's in there. So what we carry in our pockets is making a lot of this stuff obsolete. Like almost the camera. I mean, the camera in here is still not very, very good compared to what is available in regular cameras elsewhere. It's pretty good compared to what was available in 1975. There was no digital photography in 1975. This is Sears' best camera. It was film. It cost 73 hours of work to buy. That did not include the film. That did not include the flash equipment, if you want to take pictures inside. That did not include the cost of developing the film and turning the film into photographs. That included just the camera. It was probably a very good camera. I don't know what to equate that camera to today, so I chose this fairly high-end Canon digital camera. This, I believe, is off of Sears.com. $599, 23 hours of work. Still a lot less. Even though $599 is a fair amount of money, it's still a lot less work time than the film camera. You can get a low-end digital camera, still pretty good, 2.4 hours of work. And again, I have a camera in here, which is not bad, actually. I can take videos with this camera. You couldn't take videos. There was no video equipment in the Sears catalog. You could get this handy duo of devices. There's a film camera, so you take this roll of film, and then it had some contraption where you could record what's being said, right? And that contraption was set up to this film projector. Once you got the film developed at the developing store, you'd replay it here, and you'd try to synchronize the tape recorder with the film. You can imagine how well that worked. It didn't work very well at all. You know, the lips were doing one thing and the sound was something else. And you had to project it onto that screen, and still, all of it cost 106 hours of work. 12 hours for a reasonably good video projector today. 87 minutes for this thing. A microwave oven, 93 hours. Today, 5.1 hours. A gas grill, a whole week's worth of work. Look at the difference in quality. 8.5 hours of work. Standard size washer and dryer, 70 hours of work. Standard size washer and dryer today, 33 hours of work. The dishwasher, 48 hours of work. Today, 13 hours of work. A vacuum cleaner, 26 hours of work. Today, less than 3 hours of work. It's an exercise machine. I call her a Dr. Seuss lady. She comes separately. $75 for that thing. 16 hours of work to buy that. 6 hours of work to get what looks to me to be a much better, but still simple bike today. Weightlifting bench, 13 hours of work. Today, 4 hours work, and the weights come with it. So you get a better bench. I mean, that thing, I would worry, I wouldn't want to lift weights in that. I'm sure it would collapse. And I would need a good lawyer. That looks sturdy. I wouldn't need a good lawyer. I would be healthy. An electronic calculator. I can't even find these things anymore. I use this because I like to tell this story. I remember the first time I saw a calculator. It was September of '72. I was just starting high school. And my parents took me to a Sears store. And for the first time in my life, I'd seen calculators. They were displayed beneath plexiglass, see-through plastic. And the keyboards were open, you could touch them. And I remember going up to the calculators and doing calculations. And I was astounded, I had never seen one before. And I did something simple, I don't remember, it was like, 7 plus 6 equals 13. It kept getting it right, every time. Immediately, I wanted one. The cheapest one they had. The cheapest one they had. The least costly one they had. It did addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, that's it. And it had up to 6 digits. $99 in 1972. And I remember very clearly thinking to myself, my parents were working class, they didn't have a lot of money at all. And I remember thinking to myself, one day, I'm going to be rich enough to have a calculator. I might be in my 50s, but one day, I'm going to get one. This is literally true. Sometime, it was like 1995 or 1996. I'm at home and I open a cereal box and I'm pouring cereal. A calculator fell out of the cereal box. Now, it had cartoon characters on it, but it was a working calculator. It's free out of a cereal box. Of course, there's the calculator here. It's on your smartphone. If you want to buy a calculator now, it's hard to find. I found this on Amazon.com. 1.3 minutes to earn enough income to buy that calculator. I just want to show you one more thing about this one. Even between 72 and 75, the price of calculators had come down dramatically. The lowest price calculator at Sears in 1975 was $13.88, so 3 hours worth of work to buy that calculator. But you can't see it because you're too far away. But this calculator, it did the 4 basic things, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. But it too has only 6 digits. So if you had a number that required more than 6 digits, like 1 million, it couldn't handle it. So the quality of today's calculators, I saved the best for last. It's a color TV, not high def. The sound quality was poor, you have to trust me on that, compared to today. It has no remote control. To young people, today's TVs, there's this bizarre thing about this TV. You had to actually touch it to operate it. You had to physically get up and touch the TV. Press a button, turn it on. And they were always breaking down. Even this best television that Sears sold, which cost nearly 1 month of work time for the typical American worker to purchase, broke down constantly. Its picture quality was poor. It received only about 12 or so stations. It didn't matter because back then there were only, in a typical American city, there were only about 3 or 4 channels being broadcast. So it still had excess capacity in that regard. And what do we compare it to? That had remote control, picture qualities, sound qualities, much better, and it's a lot less expensive. When I showed this to my son, he pointed out that this does have one advantage. If you have a fish in a fish bowl, you can put your fish bowl on top of that. You don't want to put your fish bowl on top of that. This is really the best for last. It's a typewriter. True story, maybe this is true for some of you. I had a colleague who helped me prepare this, for this very presentation a couple of weeks ago. She's a young woman, she's 21. She's from Atlanta, Georgia. She works with me at George Mason at the Mercatus Center. And we're doing this, and she looked at this, and she said, I'd heard of typewriters, I didn't know what they were. I learned to type on a typewriter. This was Sears' best typewriter. It was electronic. It cost 57 hours worth of work. But what do you compare a typewriter to? Maybe that. It has a keyboard, a QWERTY keyboard. You can write letters and notes and memos on them. But the comparison becomes almost silly. This product is vastly superior to that product. Try surfing the web on that. I've done it. It's really slow. Then it doesn't get Wi-Fi. It's really, really difficult. This was nothing remotely like it was available in the 1970s. I used this to go onto eBay, which didn't exist in the 1970s, to order my catalog from Sears, to get it delivered to me. This is just a handful of products from the mid-1970s. Sears didn't sell food, but had I done food from the 1970s? Both restaurant food and food bought at supermarkets to be prepared at home. The work time cost of food has fallen dramatically. It's about 2/3 of the work time today, on average, as it was in the 1970s. In addition, the selection is a lot higher. We went to lunch just now at a sushi restaurant. In 1975, I had never heard the word sushi. I'm from not the biggest city. I'm from New Orleans. It's not a tiny town. There were no sushi restaurants. Raw fish was bait, not food, when I was growing up. So the quality of product offerings today is much higher. The range of product offerings today is much higher. Again, these are products for the US, the US market. I feel pretty confident that the same is true outside of the US. I feel pretty confident that the same holds true for all countries that have reasonably market-based institutions. In fact, I have a student now working at George Mason on doing a European version of this for various European countries. The countries he's working on now are France, the UK, and Spain. And when he's done with that, he's going to expand it out. Obviously, going back to the mid-1970s for countries like Lithuania and other countries that were then behind under Soviet rule create special problems. But I'm pretty confident that if you look at the progress in market-based economies, the work time that it requires of ordinary workers to earn enough income to buy things has fallen dramatically. So I think it's a myth that ordinary Americans, ordinary people anywhere in market-based societies, have stagnated economically over the years. And here's why. Here's my closing thought. As economies become richer, people don't want just more quantity. They want more quality. The economic tool, the statistical tools that we use still today to measure economic activity, these were developed in the 1930s and 40s, the basis of national income accounting and the things we use to calculate GDP. Back then, the emphasis was on measuring additions to quantity. More corn, more beef, more cars, more televisions, more radios, more pairs of jeans. In a really rich society, you don't want just more corn, more beef, more pairs of jeans. Once you retain a certain level of prosperity, you want nuances in quality, you want improvements in quality, you want improvements in selection. These changes are much harder to capture statistically. And certainly the tools that we use to measure economic activity, the formal tools, they are not set up to measure, to capture changes in quality. There are some haphazard attempts to do so, but they don't work very well, I believe. I believe a lot of the statistics that show that economies have stagnated over the past 40 or so years, I believe a lot of that is the result of inadequacies in the tools and concepts we have for measuring what goes on economically. We need better measures to capture changes in quality and to capture change in product quality and to capture changes in enhancements in the range of selections of goods and services that we have. Not all goods and services have come down in price in the same way. Some have gone up, of course, but I believe the vast majority have come down. The vast majority of ordinary people living in market-oriented societies today have to spend far fewer hours earning enough income to buy the basics of life than they had to spend in years past. Thanks. I think I have time for questions. Thank you.
So, comment ballooning household debt, or is it probably simply kind of behavioral factor?
The question is about household debt. So one argument could be, here's how this question is asked to me frequently. It is true that in the US, household debt has risen since the 1970s. It's gone down significantly since 2008. Yeah. But so has the value of households. There's no one right answer. At least I don't have a one right answer. One interpretation is, let's say that, so it has gone up. So why might that be? Well, as people get richer, they're more able to take on debt. If Bill Gates, if someone told you, you know, Bill Gates, his debt went up by $100,000 yesterday, you wouldn't feel sorry for Bill Gates. Oh, he can afford it. You can afford to take on debt. So one possible interpretation, I'm not saying this is the interpretation, one possible interpretation is that as Americans are becoming wealthier, we can be a little bit more loose with our ability to take on debt. I don't know if that's true or not. Another interpretation is that Americans are becoming too spendthrift. We're becoming too frivolous with our money, and we're spending money that we ought not spend. Regardless of which interpretation you like, however, what these data suggest, the data that it showed suggest, is that if household debt is increasing, it's not because Americans have to borrow more money. The work time cost of the vast majority of the things we buy are falling. Again, not everything, there's some notable exceptions. But the work time cost of clothing, of automobiles, of transportation, of food, of all the sorts of things I showed you here, is falling dramatically. So if Americans are still taking on more debt, in spite of that, then that would indicate frivolousness on the part of my fellow Americans. But they're not being driven to take on that debt by economic necessity. I think that, if anything, the economic necessity of taking on debt, I believe, has loosened over the years.
What about accommodation? Does it imply also?
Housing, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So the three, I'm glad you brought that up. I was hoping someone asked a question. There are three big areas where, measured in work time costs, they have become more expensive. Those three big areas are housing, education, particularly collegiate education, post-secondary education, and healthcare. Those are the three big areas. And these are not unimportant areas. They're important areas. But even for each of those areas, you can't jump too quickly to the conclusion that they're failing. You might expect me, given the nature of the seminar and what little you probably know about me, you might expect me to say, oh, those are three areas where the government is especially heavily involved. And they are. The government is especially heavily involved in each of those three areas. But that's not what I'm going to say. I mean, I don't dismiss that, but that's not the angle I want to take. If you look at each of those three areas, and you adjust for quality, it's not clear that their cost has gone up that much. Take post-secondary education. To the extent, and this is true for most Americans at least, that post-secondary education is an investment in an income-earning asset. You want to increase your human capital. if the amount that it adds to your lifetime income rises, well, you would expect that the cost of that asset would rise. In the same way that if the value of a bond goes up, you expect its price to go up. Kevin Murphy, an economist at the University of Chicago, probably the most brilliant student that the late Gary Becker ever produced, has done a lot of work over the past few years on looking at the returns to education to lifetime income. And what he's found is that since the 1970s, the addition that having a college degree adds to your lifetime earnings has dramatically increased. We can talk about why, but for these purposes it doesn't matter. Getting a college diploma adds much more than it did in the past to your lifetime earnings. So it's hardly a surprise that people are willing to pay more for that. Now, let me quickly add, I don't think that's the only reason the cost of a college education has gone up. That's a good reason. There are some bad reasons why it's gone up. I personally have benefited from some of those bad reasons. I have no doubt that I am overpaid, in part because of government involvement in education. So there's some bad reasons why it's gone up. But it's not all because of some failure of the education market. Look at housing. It's true, the work time cost of housing has gone. If you measure the work time cost of housing in almost any way conceivable, it's risen. But also look at the average house in America. It is larger, measured in both square meters and cubic meters. So people have more floor space, and they have taller ceilings on their houses are bigger. And they have fewer people living in them, by the way. So the amount of personal space has increased. The typical house today comes equipped as standard equipment with central air conditioning, with an automatic dishwasher. It's built with material, in parts of the world, parts of the US where it matters, it's built with materials that resist termites. The quality of the plumbing that brings the water into your home is higher than it was in the 1970s. So the quality of the house is higher. Does that explain the full rise in price? I don't think it does, but it explains part of it. Healthcare. Here's a mental experiment that I would challenge you to do. Google, using whatever search terms you like, terms that will give you some sense of what healthcare was like in 1975 or 1980 or 1970, sometime back then. See what new pharmaceuticals are now available that were then not available, or that were then available only to the super rich. Look at what surgical procedures were like then compared to now. And then ask yourself the following question. If someone gave you this choice I'm about to give you, which would you choose? Here's the choice. If someone could do this. I will let you have 1975 healthcare at 1975 prices with your 2015 income. Or you can have 2015 healthcare at 2015 prices at your 2015 income. Now you might think people would go for the first. I've looked at healthcare in the 1970s. And I remember it. I wasn't a child in 1975. I was 17. Well, I wasn't a child. I was 17. But I remember. I can't say that everyone would make the same choice I would make. I would definitely choose 2015 healthcare at 2015 prices compared to 1975 healthcare at 1975 prices. The quality of healthcare today is so much better. The range of treatments is so much larger. I had surgery, minor surgery, 2 years ago, just hernia surgery. I was talking to the surgeon, and we just ran. This is what surgeons and patients do. And he said he started doing surgery in 1982, and the kind of surgery that I was in for an hour. An hour. I walked in, an hour later, I was out. Now, I couldn't drive myself home. I had to have someone drive me home. I was still a little bit loopy. But I was in and out within an hour. In 1982, he said I would have been in for a whole day. I would have spent the night. And there were, he didn't elaborate, there were certain dangers in 1982. They weren't great, but certain dangers in 1982 that have since largely been eliminated. So even for those three big areas, it's not clear that Americans are worse off. I don't want to leave with the impression that I think we're living in some sort of nirvana, that everything is perfect, that there's no room for improvement, that everything is going splendidly. I don't believe that. But I also don't believe that, in fact, I'm quite confident, I just know it now, having looked at these data, and these and other data, that the fruits of economic growth have not been captured just by the 1%. They continue to be fairly widely distributed. And I think that's a good thing. You should be happy that you live in this world. Okay, thank you.